Testing, 1, 2, 3. Was the sound fixed on the video device? Remember the last few weeks?
It's something wrong with the audio last 2 weeks, and I'm checking.
Okay. Can you tell if it's working? Excuse me?
It's a lot of static.
Oh. Whenever I speak, you get the static, or the static is continuous? Excuse me?
I'm asking the audience on the internet.
The audience.
Yeah.
So they'll type in whether they can hear clearly or not? Can you hear my voice clearly?
But if we turn it on, there will be full of echo.
Full of what?
Echo.
Echoes.
Not really test it. It's not better.
So how can you test it?
Because I'm communicating with the audience. I can test it with my.
Yeah, but you need a voice speaking. I have to be speaking, right?
Yes.
If I just keep silent, then they can't tell. Should I read something to...
Is it better?
Okay, you want to see if it's better. Okay, thus have I heard... Wrong glasses. On one occasion, the Blessed One was wandering among the Kosalans together with a large sangha of bhikkhus. Then the Blessed One left the main road, and at a certain place he smiled. Thus have I heard, on one occasion the Blessed One was wandering among the Kosalans, together with a large sangha of bhikkhus. Then the Blessed One left the main road, and at a certain place he smiled. Thus have I heard, on one occasion the Blessed One was dwelling at Chuang Monastery in Taishu Hall on the shrine of of Bante's room. Okay, so let us start then. Okay, I'm going to start. Whether they can get it or not, we have to start. Okay, so we start with the homage to the Buddha. Namo tassa bhagavato arahato Samma Sambuddhassa. Namo tassa bhagavato arahato samma sambuddhassa. Namo tassa bhagavato arahato samma sambuddhassa. Okay, good morning, everybody. Okay, the last time we were discussing a sutta which was very heavy in matters of doctrine and dealing with the details of Buddhist practice and dealing with very high stages of practice. Now we come to a sutta, actually it will be like a series of suttas which focus on stories, and some of them have almost a legendary type of quality. And so, when we come to these suttas, it won't be so much me giving a lecture and just asking questions, but maybe we will explore some of these stories together and see what kind of significance we can draw out from them. Because I always believe that even though a story seems to be largely legendary, but there always seems to be some kind of message or instructions coming through the framework of the story. Okay, so this is the story. First, the sutta is number 81 in the Majjhima Nikaya. It's called the Ghatikara Sutta, and it's about a person named Ghatikara the potter. Actually, the word Ghatikara itself means pot maker. So it seems to be more of a designation than a proper name based on his occupation. Okay, so the sutta begins when the Buddha has been wandering among the Kosalans together with a large community of monks. Okay, and then it's said that the Buddha left the main road and probably went off a little bit on a side road, and at a certain place he smiled. And so when the Buddha smiles like this, it seems to be inviting a question from his disciples. So when Ananda saw the Buddha smile, then it occurred to the Venerable Ananda, he thought, what is the reason for the Blessed One to smile? And then this is interesting. He says, Tathagatas do not smile for no reason. Why do I say that this sentence seems interesting and a little bit intriguing? That's not what I'm thinking of. I'd say that's too technical. Read the sentence again. Okay, first it says, what is the reason, what is the cause for the Blessed One's smile? Tathagatas do not smile for no reason. Actually, that's a good question, but it wasn't what I had in mind. Exactly. It's phrasing this point in a plural form, as though Ananda somehow knows what all of the Buddhas do and don't do. And it seems a little bit puzzling. How does Ananda know this? I mean, I don't know. Could it be the Buddha told him? Or maybe Ananda is just drawing an inference? But anyway, I don't have a definite answer. Unless one of you do. If you do, speak up. But it just seems to me somewhat intriguing, even a little puzzling, that suddenly the text shifts from a singular, the Blessed One, the Buddha Gautama, who is standing right next to me, to a generalization about what all of the Buddhas do. Of course, Ananda might know this from the point that Barbara made, that nobody smiles without a reason. So, but probably, maybe the point that Ananda's statement is trying to convey is that the Buddha wants to convey some point, so he's smiling in this way, not just through purely natural, just as a spontaneous reaction to some situation, but because he wants to provoke in us a question to ask about the smile. Okay, so then, when Ananda thinks in this way, then he politely puts his hands in the Anjali position, and he asks the Buddha, again, he just expresses his thoughts, again moving from the singular to the plural. Okay, so then the Buddha, now he's going to begin the story. Or at least he's going to introduce the subject of the story. Okay, so the Buddha says, once Ananda, in this place, it's probably now a deserted field or open field, but the Buddha says, in this very place there was a prosperous and market town called Vebalinga, with many inhabitants and crowded with people. And now the Blessed One, it's the Buddha Kassapa, who is accomplished, that's Arahat, and fully enlightened, the Sammasambuddha, lived near the market town Vebalinga. And it was here that the Blessed One, Kassapa, had his monastery, and it was right here that he sat and advised the Sangha of bhikkhus. So right in this very spot, this Buddha Kassapa had a monastery, and it was right in this spot that he used to sit when he would give discourses to the monks. Okay, who is the Blessed One Kassapa, the Buddha Kassapa? Anybody know? Excuse me? Exactly. Yeah, he was the Buddha immediately preceding Gautama Buddha. According to the early Buddhist texts, well, let's say the early Buddhist text mentions 7 Buddhas, or 6, 1, 2, Kassapa, Kakosanda, Konakamena, Kassapa. According to the early Buddhist text, Gautama Buddha is let me put it this way. The early Buddhist texts mention 5 Buddhas who preceded Gautama Buddha. So the 5 who preceded Gautama, we go back, I think it's 91 cosmic cycles. It's the Buddha named Vipassi. Then he was followed by the Buddha named Sikhi. And those 2 belong to another world cycle, not the present world cycle. Then in this present world cycle, we have the Buddha Kakusanda, Konagamana, Kassapa, and then Gautama. Okay, this is the traditional Buddhist belief, but it's not just a belief that appeared to arise in later times, but it's actually mentioned, this sequence or succession of Buddhas is mentioned several times in the suttas, in different Nikayas. And now this is a curious point that maybe some of you could help me out with. Okay, we have, through the work of historians, archaeologists, paleontologists, geologists, a pretty, I mean, this is quite astonishing. We have a very accurate idea of the past history of humanity from the very time when beings who seemed little different from other types of apes got up on their hind legs and started moving about. And, through the fossil record, we could trace the evolution of these beings, the growth of the skull size to accommodate a increasing size of the brain. We can trace the migration of the primeval human beings, originally starting someplace in East Africa and spreading out across the globe. So maybe there was a separate line that began in someplace in China. I'm not sure what the latest findings are. And then we have records of, the lifestyle of primitive man during the stage of the hunter-gatherer, the beginnings of agriculture, development from a very primitive stage of agriculture through early civilizations, up to Indian civilization in the time of the Buddha. And then we have pretty accurate historical records from the time of the Buddha up to the present. Of course, there might be some gaps here and there, but pretty much we can conjecture or speculate what took place within those gaps. But we don't have any record, nothing to indicate that in order for a Buddha to have arisen before Gautama, there would have had to be a fully developed Indian civilization. And not only that, but the Buddhist texts tell us the lifespans of these past Buddhas. And I think it said that the lifespan of Kassapa was 20,000 years, something like that. I don't remember the exact figure, but it was much, much longer than the lifespan of human beings today. I think the way it goes is that in Kakosandas, when the Buddha Kakosanda had arisen, in this very planet, the lifespan was 80,000 years. Then it went down, or maybe it was 60,000 years. Then Konagamana, it went down to 40,000 years. In the time of Kassapa Buddha, it was 20,000 years. And then we come to Gautama Buddha. This is a way of kind of showing how humanity has degenerated over time. It said that the lifespan of the healthiest human being is 120 years. But most human beings will live 80 years or about 80 years. So we don't have any trace of a highly developed Buddha civilization in the archaeological records. We should find, beneath the archaeological finds coming from the Vedic period, there should then be traces of a Buddha civilization beneath that, but there's no traces like that. And there would have to be some kind of fossils to indicate, or at least artifacts to indicate, that human beings had extremely long lifespans. So how do we make sense out of that? Please feel free to say anything you.
It's a big question, but I'll say that first, just quoting from Dr. Ian Stevenson at University of Virginia. He studies. They have a division of perceptual studies,
Yeah.
division of personality studies,
Yeah.
children very accurate.
Yeah.
So that feels more neuropsychology. And while that has had a solid understanding in other parts of the world thousands of years ago in our culture, it's just coming into play as evidence. Ian Stevenson's very clear, mathematics is the only field with proof.
Mm-hmm.
Everything else is a question of evidence.
Yeah.
So it's just looking at those 50 years and seeing these little children who have crystal clear memories
Yeah.
of specific people, specific products, specific machinery.
Yeah.
Such a short window that, but that the meditative practice begins to introduce to one's own mind,
We could what?
begins to introduce to one's own mind a realm of infinite consciousness, in which case that exposure is clear infinity and infinity every single thing can possibly be imagined and not has existed, exists. Finding the evidence, in other words, just tracking back to little children, one life,
Yeah.
so small,
Yeah.
in our time, in our
Yeah. Yeah.
so the idea of tracking back to other planets.
Oh, that's no problem. Yeah.
Even looking at Julian Barber's work in Physics Without Time, and looking at other physicists who are attempting to remove time and rework all the equations, I think it comes to sometimes a point of how can a human being not be deluded with this lifespan view of things, which can be very difficult to transition to infinite view of things. Does that make any sense?
That makes sense in itself, but I don't see how it addresses this particular problem. That how do we account for the lack of any kind of archaeological evidence for a fully developed Buddhist civilization on this planet?
He speaks of going everything back to four elements. Where does the Buddha go? Where does the Tathagata go? And he speaks of the four elements. Yes. So and he talks about, I won't keep it up, but this expansion, collapse, expansion.
Yeah, that is mentioned in the text.
So reduced back to four elements.
Yeah.
Then the will coming out, volitional activity coming out of those four elements, and collapsing back into. I don't see why in infinity this exact planet has not existed infinite times with different cultures, different Buddhists, different presidents alone.
You know, that seems a bit speculative to me. Because,
Let me ask this question.
okay,
Cause and effect, if there's no original cause, there's just cause and effect.
yeah.
Does that not say everything exists? Does that not say what infinity is? Cause and effect, cause and effect.
Yeah, first, I don't think it would mean that everything that exists, that this is getting a little off track, but it doesn't mean that everything that exists now has existed over and over again in the past. That would be more like it was Nietzsche's theory of the eternal recurrence. And it doesn't mean that everything that's possible has already existed. I don't see that as... Yeah, because the sutta is saying in this exact spot. So, I mean, it's certainly conceivable the universe, this world system is expanding, contracting, expanding, contracting, and each time it goes through the stage of expansion and development, then it's quite possible that beings, at least on some planets, beings like humans will arise, and amongst the humans, Buddhas will arise. So the idea of, past Buddhas or even Buddhas presently existing now on other worlds, in other world systems is quite, not problematic at all in my view. But what seems to be problematic is saying that in this spot, that's on this earth, right there in India, another Buddha existed who had his monastery and taught the monks. David, did you have some? Take the microphone so that the sound gets amplified.
I don't really want to take this in.
It's on. It's on.
I wanted to ask the question, why is it necessary to take this literally?
Yeah, yeah, yeah.
I mean, that would, sort of sidestep the issue and look at it perhaps in a more possible ways.
Yeah, I would be inclined not to take it so literally. But I was just thinking maybe somebody else had some suggestion to sort of defend a literalist interpretation. Did Barbara, you want to say something? Take the microphone.
That would be my take on it too, but having been in India at the beginning of the year, I was quite impressed how much archaeology has not been done.
Mm-hmm.
It just strikes the surface. And in fact, when they started
Yeah.
going back from
Yeah.
the Chinese reports of what India, the original India
Yeah.
was like,
Yeah.
the earlier India was like, that India didn't really know these places were there, so they started digging.
Yeah, that's actually true, yeah. Yeah, yeah, yeah.
And even one place, I was so impressed, where with just the little path to the buses, and that, I think was Kushinagar,
Kushinaga, yeah, yeah.
where that little path, as you walked, there were bricks that were starting to be revealed
Mhm.
by the path,
Yeah,
so that there were more walls underneath
yeah,
nobody'd ever looked at.
yeah.
One hill, that is a beautiful hill with a beautiful Bodhi tree on it,
Mm-hmm.
and it's actually a stupa.
Mm-hmm. Oh, yeah, yeah.
They dug it out.
Yeah, yeah. Okay. And I should also mention that at present there is, I think it's in Nepal, a stupa which is said to hold the relics of the Buddha Kassapa after his cremation. You know, the relics were placed there. I've never been to see that stupa, and I don't know whether anybody has ever looked inside. Anybody who's alive now has looked inside to confirm whether relics are there. Then we would have to raise the question, are these really relics? Or somebody could put, just ordinary bones there and say those are the remains of a Buddha. Anyway, there are various problems about this idea. I don't know a solution. Okay, let us continue. And we don't have to take it so literally. That's maybe the simplest solution. But take it as sort of a story that's conveying a teaching lesson. Okay, so when the Buddha mentions this fact, then Venerable Ananda takes his outer robe, he folds it in four, and he asks the Buddha to sit on that spot. And so then he says that if you do so, then this place will have been used by two Buddhas. Okay, so the Buddha then sits down on the seat, and then he's going to now relate the story. So he says that he repeats what he said earlier, that in this place there was this prosperous town called Vabalinka, where the Buddha Kassapa had his monastery. Okay, and now we come to the main part of the story, that in the town of Vabalinka, the Buddha Kassapa had a supporter as his chief supporter, a potter named Ghatikara. And as I mentioned earlier, the word Ghatikara is actually from kara, which means maker, and gata means a pot. So Ghatikara means a maker of pots. And Ghatikara, the potter, had as a friend, his close friend, a Brahmin student named Jyotipala. There seems to be some things of significance coming through here. I don't see our Richard Duffy. Is he here today? Usually he would catch the significance of this. But there seems to be something being conveyed, even very subtly, a message here. Can anybody see what it is? To get the message, you would have to know something about Indian society. We don't have any people of Indian descent.
Between different
Exactly, exactly. And the pot maker would be considered, I mean, it's like a working class. And the Brahmin is like, you know, the religious elite. And not only that there's a friendship between Ghatikara, the potter, from a low-caste family, and the Brahmin student, the young Brahmin named Jyotipala. But if somebody knows anything about Indian society or Indian names, they would know that the name Kassapa, or in Sanskrit Kashyapa, is a Brahmin name. And so the Buddha, who is, in this case, from not Gautama Buddha, who is from the Kshatriya clan, but the Buddha Kassapa, who's originally from the Brahmin clan, he has as his chief supporter not somebody like our Buddha has as his chief supporter, and not the Pindika, who's the equivalent of a banking executive, you know, a wealthy financier. But he has his chief supporter is this, you know, little dinky guy who's making pots for a living. It's as if maybe, I don't know if the comparison is fully respectful to the Buddha, but it's as if you were to go into, say, what do they call this, a Starbucks, and you were to see, was this the chairman of Chase, of J.P. Morgan Chase, Janie Dimon, sitting and having a cup of coffee with a taxi driver. And then you walk over and say, "Aren't you Jamie Dimon?" He says, "Oh, yes, yes, and I want you to meet my best friend, Joe the taxi driver, or Joe the plumber." No, not that. I'm sorry. Not that Joe the plumber. Maybe that got stuck, a meme stuck in my mind. Harry the plumber. Okay, so now, one day, Ghatikara asks his friend Jyotipala, and then the important thing about Jyotipala, that will be mentioned at the end of the sutta. Anybody know what that important fact about Jyotipala is? Exactly. Jyotipala is a past life, it was a past life incarnation of the being who is to become Gautama Buddha or Shakyamuni Buddha. And so this story is actually somewhat like a Jataka story. The word Jataka means referring to previous births. So this is the story of a past birth of Shakyamuni Buddha, referring to a time when he was a young Brahmin. Okay, so one day the potter Ghatikara addresses his friend Jyotipala and he says, "My dear Jyotipala, let us go and see the Buddha Kassapa. It's good to see the Blessed One who's an Arahant and the perfectly enlightened one. And then the Brahmin Jyotipala, who's going to become Gautama Buddha, says," I don't know if it comes through so well in English, when he says, "Enough." It's like alang. It's like, you know, get out of, you know, what are you saying? A crazy idea. What's the use of seeing that bald-pated recluse? It uses the mundaka samadaka, that baldy head. You know, it's a really derogatory term. And this was the kind of terms that the Brahmins in the Buddha's time would use, or at least some of them, those who were rather arrogant and puffed up with pride about their class status. That was the term that the Brahmins would use for the samanas, for the ascetics, even when they would, sometimes they would denigrate the Buddha Gautama, by calling him a bald-headed ascetic, baldy-head. Okay, so a second time, a third time, Ghatikara tries to persuade his friend Jyotipala to go see the Buddha, and each time Jyotipala dismisses it with the same kind of derogatory remark. Okay, so then Ghatikara, finally, he gives up and he says to Jyotipala, let's take a loofah, it's a kind of bathing device, and some bath powder, and go to the river to bathe. And so they go to the river, they go into the river, and then I think Ghatikara had a sort of plot or a scheme in his mind when he took Jyotipala to the river. Okay, so he asks him again, let's go see the Buddha. Again, Jyotipala sort of dismisses the suggestion. A second time, a third time, he says that. And then now in paragraph 8, then the potter Ghatikara seized the Brahmin student Jyotipala by the belt and said, let's go see the Buddha, whose monastery is quite nearby. Again, Jyotipala dismisses the suggestion. And now paragraph 9, then when the Brahmin student Jyotipala had washed his head, the potter Ghatikara seized him by the hair. You know, like in India, the men would grow the hair long, and the Brahmins would have really long hair, like I was going to say, like, I think you're the only one who has, yeah, you're the only one who has really long hair. All of you women have, even these two who are visiting, have much shorter hair than a Brahmin in India in the Buddha's time would have had. They would have the long hair, which they would wind up and then turn into a kind of, wind up into a kind of, what do they call this on the top of the head? Like a coil on the top of the head. Okay, so Ghatikara seizes him by the hair and says, let's go see the Buddha. Now there's a great significance in that. Again, it's something very culturally conditioned, so those of you who have been born and grown up in America might not get it. But what is that significance? He grabs him by the hair. I don't know if you have these conventions in Sri Lanka as well. Okay, the idea is that, you know, generally a low-class person shouldn't even touch an upper-class person. But for a low-class person to touch an upper-class person by the head or by the hair, it's like, you know, if they were to apply the rules of the Veda, he would be in danger of getting stoned to death or getting beaten, severely beaten. But Ghatikara, you know, he wants to show that he's so insistent that Jyotipala should go see the Buddha that he's even willing to violate this very, very dangerous class regulation in order to convince Jyotipala of his point. Probably he knows that Jyotipala is his friend, so Jyotipala won't do anything drastic to him. But if Ghatikara were to touch another Brahmin, you know, who's not his friend on the head, if Ghatikara were to touch another Brahmin on the head, he could be in for a severe beating. So that's why when Ghatikara does this, Jyotipala thinks it's wonderful, it's marvelous. Here the words actually in Pali, acharya, bhuta, they don't mean wonderful and marvelous the way we do when we are approving something as good. Like, if somebody gives me a very delicious cup of tea and they ask, how do you like this tea? Oh, I say, oh, this is wonderful, this is marvelous. Not in that way, but it's more like in the sense like, this is amazing, this is astounding, this is really shocking. Maybe we could say this is really shocking that this Pada Ghatikara, who was of an inferior class, really the word birth here, it's jati, but means class, should presume to grab me by the hair after we've washed our heads. So surely this can't be something simple, that there must be some really important reason that he's doing this. So finally, Jyotipala agrees and says, okay, my dear Ghatikara, you can let go of me. We'll go visit the Buddha. Okay, so they go visit the Buddha. Ghatikara pays homage to the Buddha, because Ghatikara is the disciple. And Jyotipala, who's still something of a proud Brahmin, exchanges greetings with him. He can't be rude to the Buddha and say, you're just a baldy-headed recluse. So he has to say, conform to conventions and say, how are you, sir? Are you keeping good health? Do you like this monastery, this area here? And so on. So then after they exchange greetings, the Buddha gives a discourse to the two young men. And at the end of the discourse, what a surprise. Okay, they get up from their seats and then they depart. And then Jyotipala asks Ghatikara, he says, now that you've heard the Dhamma, my dear Ghatikara, why don't you go forth from the home life into homelessness